Hi everyone, sorry for that. The internet connection here in Cape Town went down. Let me just repeat in case anyone missed it. So in light of heavy workload and cognition being a new kind of tool, we will be extending the dates for your assessment deadlines, okay? So assessment 1 and 2 are due on the 23rd of May for the latest, and the final assessment 3 is due on June the 2nd for the latest. And when I say the latest, I really mean it. Marks have to be in that week, final marks. So that is ultimately the last date I can give you to complete the assessments of cognition. That being said, there are a number of people who have done extremely well, especially in assessment 2. So keep it up. And I look forward to great assessment 3 marks. Okay. Now, let's start with today's topic. Okay. So the idea was, everyone, that we go through the assessment answers today, but because of the fact that I'm granting a general extension to everyone, I obviously can't go through the answers, or it would be unfair to those who have already done the assessment. Okay, so what we're going to do is work through an information literacy tutorial very briefly, and if you have any questions, just ask. Okay, so one thing that I found really helpful is the fact that cognition is one tool with which to engage in understanding a little bit more about information literacy and academic literacy. But there are a whole bunch of other tools available. And if you just go to Google and type in information literacy tools online, you will find a bunch of great tools to use, okay? Especially the ones that are made available by university libraries. So I found one that I thought was particularly good, and let's go to that now. Okay, so as you can see, this is from St. John's University, and basically what I did was typed in information literacy tutorials online and looked through the first couple, and this one stood out as quite good. Okay, so as we come near to the end of the semester, obviously everybody's writing their final essays or getting ready for exams, so this might help in preparation of that. Okay, so one thing we do when we write essays is obviously choose a topic. Okay, so sometimes topics are assigned or you are asked to choose your own. Okay, I think what's very important is that we remember that when writing an essay, regardless of whether you are choosing the topic or your professor or your lecturer has assigned it, is that it's going to be relevant or has to be relevant to the course. Okay, so look at your class notes, your syllabus, the readings that you've done, and get an understanding of, okay, is this relevant to the kind of themes that I've been discussing? Okay, for example, in a course on poverty, globalization, and development, you would probably not talk a whole lot about religion, okay, unless you make it relevant to those issues. Okay, so make sure that you do, email either the kind of key points you want to make in your essay to your lecturer or your tutor and see if they're okay with that, or otherwise email them your introduction, just to get a sense that you're on the right track. What also helps as a lecturer and tutor is to see the readings that a student intends to use. Giving them, or gaining insight into the readings will help me see if you're on the right track or not. Now, then you need to get an overview of your general topic, okay? And there are a bunch of ways in which you can do that. remember that in this kind of instance, I would say that Wikipedia is a useful source. So when you're looking kind of just for a general overview of a topic, going to an encyclopedia, it doesn't even have to be Wikipedia, but going there and getting a sense of, okay, these are the key kind of ideas around a topic, that is very, very helpful. Okay. Also use your class readings to find out, what are the things that we're emphasizing in our particular course. Then obviously you need to make sure that you narrow your paper down adequately. You're going to be writing 1,500 to maybe 3,000 word essays, okay? Which means that you really, really can't cover every aspect of a topic, okay? Also, you don't want to be too narrow and you want to be answering the question. So here's an example. If you're writing a research paper on the topic of immigration, right, you might want to look at a particular group. So here, obviously, this is an American example, so Italians, and you might want to look at Zimbabweans relevant to South Africa. You might want to look at a place, so like South Africa or the United States. You might want to look at a time period. So these are all ways of narrowing your topic down. Then you have to develop an actual research question. So once you have established kind of a focal point for your topic, you need to think of a helpful way in which to phrase the topic to form a research question. Okay, so often you can lean on the what, where, how, why, when. Okay, those are the common ones you can use in order to frame a research question. So why did the number of Italian immigrants increase? How did the number of Italian immigrants increase? In what ways? All those kinds of things, you can use the kind of W's to work out a question. Okay. The research question will then help you formulate a thesis. Okay. Now, a thesis statement is very, very important. And what I've realized with a lot of students is that students do not formulate a thesis statement. Okay. They either restate a question, so they will say, why have the number of African immigrants in South Africa increased? That is a question, okay? And in the introduction, they'll say, this essay will talk about why the number of African immigrants in South Africa has increased. That's great. I'm glad you've got a focus. However, you need to be actually providing the answer to that question, okay? And that is the thesis statement. And I always think about it as the main thing I want my reader to remember once they've read my paper, okay? So an answer would be, the number of African immigrants in South Africa has increased due to increased desertification in Africa, or due to increased food scarcity in other parts of Africa. Okay, so an actual answer. Now, an effective thesis typically has the following characteristics. It makes a specific claim about the topic. So like I said, the number of African immigrants to South Africa have increased because of a specific thing. Okay, so you could say because of political and economic and social reasons, right? Or you could say because of mainly political reasons. So those are all specific things about the topic. You need to be able to state it in 1 or 2 sentences, okay? You need to have it supported by evidence, and it's not simply a statement of fact. So the number of African immigrants to South Africa has increased. That is a statement of fact and is not an argument, okay? Again, the why, where, how, those are the kinds of things that will turn that into an argument or a thesis. So here are some examples of ineffective and effective theses. Okay, ineffective. The number of Italians immigrating to the United States rose and then declined between 1900 and 2006. So there's a very clear example of just a statement of fact. Okay, that might be a bit of evidence you use in your paper, but it's not a thesis statement. Effective, the ebb and flow of Italian immigration to the United States in the 20th century was shaped by three factors: overpopulation, availability of jobs, and immigration policies. So now I actually have an answer to my question. Why has the immigration increased? Well, for three factors: overpopulation, availability of jobs, and immigration policies. Okay, so like I said, the first one is a statement of fact and fails to address why the number of Italian immigrants has increased. Okay, so when you should try and answer your essay questions in kind of 1 or 2 sentences, actually answer the question, and that is kind of what your thesis statement is. Let's look at another example. Global warming will have a major impact on food production in Africa. Okay, good to know, but that's not really an effective thesis. Okay, this one is slightly better because it's hinting at an argument, okay, but it's still a bit vague. So what's an effective thesis? Well, global warming will result in increased desertification and decreased food production in Africa, especially in the sub-Saharan region. Okay, so there's something very specific that we can see happening in terms of food production and the real cause for it. Okay, so global warming through the avenues of increased desertification and decreased food production will have an effect. And then we zoomed in on a specific region. Okay, so like I said, the first one is vague and the second one is more specific. Okay, also, you'll notice that global warming will have a major impact. We don't know in that first one if that's positive or negative impact or negligible. Okay, and in the second one we can see that it's obviously going to have a negative impact. Now let's look at this one. Capital punishment may not be a feasible deterrent to violent crime. It may not be, okay, and that is kind of what we call hedging. So we don't want to be we don't want to sound too cocky maybe or confident in our answer to a question. So capital punishment may not be feasible as a deterrent to crime. Okay. A more effective thesis would be, despite claims to the contrary, there is no evidence that capital punishment provides an effective deterrent to violent crime. Okay. So there what we're saying is that ultimately there's no evidence that capital punishment provides an effective deterrent to crime, despite the fact that many people may think so, or despite some claims that people make. Okay, so when you are making a thesis statement, you are trying to be cautious to a certain degree, but you're not trying to be cautious to the extent that your paper lacks kind of any force or any validity. Okay, so the second one is very, very nice here in the fact that it identifies that there are certain people and certain theorists or ideas or whatever that identifies that capital punishment works in a particular way. You're saying, however, that there's no real evidence of it as a deterrent. Okay, and often this is how your arguments will be, because you'll often have for or against and advantages and disadvantages. Okay, and what you need to say is that despite the advantages, this is largely a disadvantage, or despite the disadvantages, the advantages outweigh that. Okay, so that's often what you are doing, and make sure that you're not saying it too cautiously, but are still making a statement. So this is an important reminder that it's fine to change your thesis statement over the course of your research, because the idea is that you'll suddenly start to find more information and you'll get a clearer sense of what's going on. Okay, so you might think that capital punishment, which is the death penalty, is bad, and there's no way to say that it's good. Okay, however, you might then do a lot of reading and realize that most of the arguments for capital punishment being bad are really just moral, and so it's all about people saying, we really shouldn't do that because it's a bad thing. Whereas the arguments for capital punishment actually being effective are more based on, these kinds of scientific or more empirical research, and then you have to weigh those up. Okay. So let's think about information needs, okay? And this is largely some of the stuff that you've been doing in your tutorials on cognition, okay? Okay. So once you've got a topic and you've made a kind of tentative thesis statement, you kind of know where you want to go, you need to start researching, okay? And you need to ask yourself some questions, and these are very, very similar to the ones that cognition highlights. So how much information I need, how recent or old must the information be, and do I use primary or secondary sources? Now, obviously the length of your assignment dictates how much information you'll need. And this is obviously a question that you need to run by your lecturer or your tutor, but generally, obviously, longer assignments need more sources and shorter assignments need fewer. And remember, it's also about the purpose of the assignment. So depending on what the task asks you, are you looking at disadvantages and advantages? You might then need more sources than if you were just looking at the advantages, okay? Because you're only looking at one aspect of a topic. So look at the task itself and see how many sources you think you might need. Do I need current or old information? Well, this generally depends on the subject or discipline. Okay, so for example, the effect of global warming on food production in Africa will require more current information. But a topic that's talking about, Italian immigration to the United States will probably have more older and more recent information. Okay, so that's important to note. Also, there are topics where you deal with big ideas such as alienation or a psychological theory, and in those cases you're obviously going to go back to the key theorist on that topic. In sociology that's very common, so in sociology we'll look at Marx, or we'll look at Weber, or someone like that, and they'll have been writing ages and ages ago. But if those are the key theorists in the field, you still might lean on them. Okay, and similarly in psychology, you might look at Freud and his writings from ages and ages ago, despite the fact they're not current. Okay. Do I need primary sources? So primary sources are first-hand accounts of the topic. Okay, so literature, autobiographies, experiments, government documents, etc. And you need to think about what you might need in terms of them. Okay, so you might want to consult especially government documents and policies on the topic of immigration and newspaper articles from that time, and that's all primary sources. Okay. However, primary sources really lack background information and context, and they're personal, and they contain a lot of bias, and they're subjective. Okay, so we have to take those into account. So secondary sources are generally where we find most of our academic information from, and these are literary criticism, biographies, reviews, etc. Okay, and when we talk about that, we're obviously including things like journal articles, books, etc. So those all involve an interpretation of primary sources, okay, and they contextualize the topic, and they obviously provide a lot more holistic and rounded understanding of an issue, and that's important when you are doing academic writing. Okay, so think about what you need in terms of your assignment, and then also think about the combination of primary and secondary sources. So for example, if we were looking at the topic of elections now in light of tomorrow, and I hope you are all going to vote if you are of age, then we need to make sure that we are looking at maybe the current newspaper articles that are coming up about the topic, and these obviously are very sensationalized and are also very, about the more kind of tantalizing details of the election. And then we also need to look at the policies and those kinds of things as well. Okay. Right. So you would then need to know how to find books, find journals, etc. Okay, and that all needs to come from your library itself. Okay, so go to the Cornerstone Library or go on to a library portal and then find out how you can search for information. Okay, you can also search for information on the web, and let's go through this quickly. Okay, so that was basically just the overview of this information literacy tutorial, and I hope that you found that helpful. Are there any questions? I have unmuted your mics, so are there any questions? No. Okay. One last thing before we go. I just like to show you a little trick that Okay. So onto cognition we go. Okay, when you log into Cognition, okay, so logging into Cognition, something that I found very, very helpful is that when you go to a cog, can resume it. Okay, what you can do is go to the overview button. Okay, and this gives you an overview of the entire cog. Okay, so you can copy and paste this, and you can see kind of what the entire thing was about, and you can export that and have it as a document. Okay, so I thought that was quite useful. As you are going through the different cogs, I do think that it's very, very important that you copy and paste the information that you find. Okay, so I've got a Word document, for example, and it's labeled, well, different Word documents labeled for the different cogs, and when I find information, I actually copy and paste it from the internet onto the Word document and use that as my reference point. Okay, so when I'm doing the assessments, I do have a reference point for the work. Okay, and that's also going to be helpful later when I need information and I don't have cognition anymore. Okay, so especially in terms of cog number 1, I found having the actual information with you is quite important. Okay, thank you everyone for joining me for the tutorial. I will now be posting the assessment answers up once everyone has done assessment 1 and 2, and like I said, that is by the 23rd. So by the 23rd, assessment 1 and 2 needs to be in, so I can post the answers to the assessment on Funda, and then you'll have access to that. Okay, have a wonderful day, and I will not see you again, but I will definitely be in touch with you on Funda and by email. Okay, thank you. Bye.